The mayor pulled the teacher into his arms as if she needed comfort, and for a brief moment she seemed to enjoy it, but then she pulled away. "Billy," Miss White said, "what did that to him?" "Try to put it out of your head, Snow," Charming said. He put his hand on her shoulder and looked deep into her eyes. It was hard to believe that the usually obnoxious mayor could be so tender. "I've got my best men on it." The others filed out of Grumner's classroom, and Sheriff Hampstead took a roll of yellow police tape from his jacket. He draped an X over the door to keep anyone else from entering. "Snow, I don't want you to get involved in this," the mayor said. The teacher flashed him an irritated look, but then nodded. She turned and bent down so that she was at eye level with Daphne. "Are you okay?" she asked. "Don't worry about me," the little girl answered. "We see this kind of thing all the time." Mayor Charming turned to the sheriff. "Mr. Hampstead, could you make sure my Mr. White, gets home safely?" he said, blushing over his mistake. As Snow White stood up, she smiled softly, but the bright red blush on her cheeks flashed like a police siren on her pale skin. "I'd be happy to," Sheriff Hampstead said, extending his arm to the beautiful woman. They escorted her down the hall, and she stopped to gaze back at Charming before they left. "So what's next, Billy?" Sabrina said, before she burst into giggles. Daphne and Granny Brother joined her. Even Mr. Kent cracked a smile. Suddenly, a loud, goofy laugh was heard behind them. When they turned, they found Mr. Seven nearly falling over with laughter. "Billy," Sabrina continued, "that's just precious. It's so sweet. I'm going to get a cavity." "I think it's romantic," Daphne said, doing her best to stop laughing. "Enough!" Charming shouted, silencing everyone's giggles. "This is a crime scene. Rhoda, take your Rugrat and your mangy mongrel with you, or I'll have you arrested." "Watch your words, Prince," Candace growled as his eyes turned icy blue, showing everyone that the wolf was just below the surface. "Someday you're going to wake up and find someone has taken a bite out of you. Rhoda, I believe there's a law in this town about keeping animals on a leash," Charming said. The men stared at each other for a long moment, and then suddenly Candace's eyes changed back to watery gray. The old man looked exhausted, and his face grew pale. "That's quite enough of this nonsense," Granny said, stepping in between the two men. Every time Charming and Candace were in a room together, they were at each other's throats, but the old woman had a way of making them feel foolish. They stood back and lowered their eyes like two squabbling squirrels who had just been disciplined. "It's time to go." The family exited the school and found the ancient black jalopy in the parking lot. The beat-up monstrosity was in desperate need of a tune-up, and its long-neglected shocks groaned and complained as each person climbed inside. Elvis was on their back, snuggling under a huge blanket, and didn't even bother to lift his hat when the girls got in. Daphne wrapped her arms around the dog's neck and gave him a big wet smooch on the forehead. "I miss you today," she announced. Elvis tucked his head under his blanket and hid. "What's the matter with him?" the little girl asked. "He's pouting. He doesn't like to be left in the car," Granny Rhoda said as she jotted something into her notebook. "Oh, my little baby," Daphne said, trying to pull the 200-pound dog onto her lap like an infant. She showered the Great Dane in kisses. "Is somebody sad? Did somebody get left in the car? I won't ever leave you in the car." Elvis gave her a lick on the cheek, and the girl giggled. Granny spun around her seat with a delighted look on her face. "Lieblings, you know what all this means?" Sabrina groaned. "We're in the middle of a mystery. Isn't it exciting?" the old woman cried. "Yes, and pointless," the girl argued. "You heard Charming and his ridiculous spider theory. He knows the Scarlet Hand killed Mr. Grubner, but instead he lies about it. Grubner was a human, so Charming couldn't care less. Why should the ever-after mayor and the ever-after police department do anything at all? No, they'll just cover up his death, and we'll run into one dead end after another. We are Grimms, and this is what we do, Daphne said. Exactly right, little one. We are Grimms, and part of what we do is make sure that this kind of thing doesn't go unpunished. We'll just sit here until everyone is gone, and then we'll go back inside and have a look ourselves, the old woman said. I have a feeling there are a lot more clues in that room. Suddenly, Mr. Seven was tapping on the car window. He motioned for Granny Rhoda to roll it down and looked around nervously. Good evening, Mr. Seven. Mayor Charming has requested your presence at the mansion. You mean Billy? Granny said, turning in her seat to wink at the girls. The dwarf chuckled. Here's something he wishes to discuss in private. Granny Rhoda and Mr. Kenneth shared a suspicious glance. After a moment, Mr. Kenneth nodded his approval. I'll tell Miss Charming we'll be there, the old woman said. The dwarf nodded and walked over to the mayor's long white limousine. He buffed the silver stallion on the hood with his shirt sleeve, then climbed onto the stack of phone books on the driver's seat, and soon the limo was pulling away. Are you sure you're feeling up to this? Granny said, putting her hand on the old man's shoulder. Mr. Kenneth nodded. He started the car and spotted the light with a series of backfires that Sabrina was sure could be heard in the next town. They followed Charming's limo through the quiet country roads of Ferryport Landing. Sabrina gazed out at the sleepy little river town that her great-great-great-great-grandfather Wilhelm Grimm had founded. Anyone driving through it would think it was just another boring little town. They would never know that many of the residents were princes, pigs, witches, and fairies all in disguise. And on the rare occasions when one of the really big ever-afters caused trouble, such as one of the giants or dragons, the endless acres of firs, Chinese maples, and oak trees surrounded the town acted as an excellent cover from prying eyes. In addition, the invisible magical barrier that Wilhelm and the witch Baba Yaga had constructed around Ferryport Landing meant no ever after, no matter how big, could leave the area. As for the humans who lived in town, they were none the wiser. The ever-afters were too good at covering up their magic and mischief. Sabrina often wished she was oblivious too. Ferryport Landing was a perfect place to live, unless she knew that it was all a lie, and a lie kept Sabrina from getting comfortable in her new life. As they pulled into Charming's sprawling estate, Sabrina realized the mayor was the only person in town she could trust. He was corrupt, but at least he was upfront about it. He planned to buy the town piece by piece and recreate the kingdom he had given up when the ever-afters came to America. He didn't care if you liked it or not, and he didn't care if you thought it was wrong. Charming could always be counted on to do what was right for himself. He might not have any morals, but at least he was consistent. Mr. Kenneth parked the car and turned off the engine. The last time Sabrina had been at the mansion, it had been lit up like a Christmas tree for the Ferryport Landing Ball, an annual event for which the ever-after community came together to be themselves and to celebrate. Without all the glitz and glamour, Charming's mansion looked vacant. The lights were off, and the fountain, which featured a lifelike sculpture of Charming, was drained and full of dead leaves. Mrs. Grimm, if it's okay with you, I believe I will stay here, Mr. Kenneth said, as he opened the car door from Granny Rhoda. I'm feeling a bit tired, and I suspect Charming will only make it worse. Of course, Mr. Kenneth, Granny Rhoda said. I don't believe Mayor Charming poses any threat to us. Elvis whined when he saw that the family was leaving him in the car. Elvis, we're not leaving you in the car. We're putting you in charge of it, Daphne sighed. The dog lifted his huge ears as if he was listening very carefully. It's a really important job. You have to stay and guard Mr. Kenneth. Don't let anything bad happen to him. Elvis barked, confirming his orders. He sat up in the back seat and watched out of the windows for any would-be attackers. As the Grooms approached the mansion, Sabrina looked back and noticed Kenneth doing something very odd. The stick-thin man climbed on top of the car and sat Indian-style on the roof. He closed his eyes and rested his hands on his knees. "What's he doing?" Sabrina asked. "Meditative yoga," Granny replied, as if this was the natural response. "It's helping him remain centered and calm. Keeps the dog stuff at bay." Of course, the big bad wolf does yoga, Sabrina thought. Why did I even bother to ask? The trio stood on the front steps of the mansion, but before Granny could ring the bell, Mr. Seven opened the door and ushered the family inside. "Good evening," he said, and, without offering to take their coats, he turned and raced up the staircase. "I'll get the mayor." "What do you think he wants?" Daphne wondered. "Hard to say," Granny Rhoda said. "The mayor is full of surprises." "Maybe he felt like he didn't get to insult us enough at the school," Sabrina muttered, just as Charming appeared at the top of the steps. Sabrina watched him grimace and take a deep breath as he came down to join them. "This conversation must be an absolute secret," he said as he stood before them. He leaned down and pinned a shiny tin star on Sabrina's coat. It looked like the kind the sheriffs wore in old black-and-white western movies. She peered down at it and read the words "Ferryport Landing Special Forces Deputy Officer." "What's this?" she asked as Charming pinned a similar star onto Daphne's coat. The little girl looked at it and smiled. "Look at me! I'm a cowboy." "May I?" Charming said to Granny Rhoda. The old woman hesitated, but finally agreed, and he pinned the star on her dress too. "I don't think I understand what's taking place, Mayor Charming," Granny Rhoda said. "I'm deputizing you," he said uncomfortably. "Raise your right hand and repeat after me." Charming raised his right hand and waited for the grooms to do the same. Sabrina stared blankly at the man, wondering if maybe he was pulling some kind of prank on them. "Don't make this harder on me than it has to be," he begged. "The town needs your help. You know it, and I know it. Can't that be enough?" "You want our help?" Sabrina said. "I know you've been helping Hampstead," the mayor said. "For some reason, the sheriff thinks he will be able to help with this case." "Maid Charming!" Granny Rhoda exclaimed. "I never thought I'd see the day when you would come to this family for anything." The man lowered his right hand and groaned. "Do you think I would ask you if it wasn't absolutely necessary? I swore I'd see your family rot before I asked for your help, but drastic times call for drastic measures." "What are you talking about?" Sabrina demanded impatiently, but as she waited for the mayor to answer, she noticed something odd about the mansion. It was filthy. Several curtains in the ballroom had fallen and lay in heaps on the floor. A giant red stain had ruined a polar bear rug lying near the fireplace. The carpet on the stairs needed a good vacuuming, and a bucket sat on the floor collecting rain from a giant patched-up hole in the ceiling. Half a dozen overflowing bags of garbage sat by the door waiting to be taken out, and a thick layer of dust covered everything, including a full suit of armor that leaned precariously against the wall. "What happened here?" she asked. "You happened here," Charming snapped. "You and your smelly sister ruined the only fundraising event this town has each year." Daphne raised an arm to smell her armpits. She crinkled her nose and lowered her arm quickly. "I'm not that bad," she said. "You crashed an invitation-only party, brought a giant here, which nearly destroyed the mansion and several cars in the parking lot, and worst of all, you made me look like a fool in front of the town's biggest donors," the mayor said. "We didn't raise a penny. The town is broke." "We know what the fundraiser is really for," Sabrina replied. "You want to use the money to buy the whole town. Why don't you just dip into the money you've conned out of everyone for the last 200 years? "You dare question my honor?" Charming growled. "I haven't taken a penny." That's the end of this video.